Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to take a look at a Tsunami reel. It's an entry-level reel, and Tsunami is a reel that's produced in China. It's distributed by Bimini Bay Outfitters up in New Jersey, and Tsunamis have come a long way. So they've made their name as fishing lures and rods, and then they added reels to the portfolio that they carry. And they produced some entry-level reels. That's what this one is. This is a SWP 750. It's a Shockwave is the series. This one came to me because it was missing a handle, and I was able to find a replacement handle. But I'm going to take it apart. We're just going to have a look at it. Otherwise, it's in new condition. It holds about 250 yards, a 20-pound test. It's a nice compact format, so you get a lot of line in a smaller dimension reel. It's graphite frame. It's got a single ball bearing up top. It doesn't have the instant anti-reverse. Again, we've talked from time to time about what makes an inexpensive reel that way, and sometimes it's the number of bearings. In this case, there's a single ball bearing in it. Sometimes it's the elimination of that instant anti-reverse bearing, which costs a couple of dollars, and so on. So before we get too far down the road, let's talk about what we're doing. So I have a protective glove on here, and I have that for keeping the oils and greases from the reel off of my hand. I've also been using a parts tray here where I've put the pieces and parts, and as part of the disassembly process, I've taken off the handle, the spool, the drag knob, and the click rotor. That's so that I can get the rotor off here and show you what's underneath. This one, this side case goes up under the rotor, so you must take the rotor off in order to service the gears here. Some side plates actually have a brake here, and that way you can remove the side plate without touching the rotor assembly. That's not the case with this one. So I'm going to go up top and take the rotor off. Then we'll have a look under there. I'll show you how to service that if you own one of these reels, and then we'll come down below and we'll finish the rest of it. So this one has a bump guard on it, which is nice. It takes the brunt of a shock should you ram a railing or a pier or a boat or something like that. And when you take it off, take a note. There's a little hook on the back of this one, which actually fits in a slot here, and the other part is a single screw. If you didn't know that, please don't rush. If you're working on a reel, whether it's this one or something else, and you can't figure it out, and you took the thing off, don't go in and start prying on the reel. I've seen people, jam it with screwdrivers and things. You're only going to break it, and if you break it, you've lost that mechanical connection, and it's never going to fit right again. And I've seen the consequences of that come into my shop. I've seen folks come in and they've had glue on there and other things trying to hold it, or simply they've eliminated the bump guard, and it's a common occurrence. So we're going to go ahead now, and I'm just going to take the screws out here, and then we'll go up and take the rotor off, and I'll show you that assembly, and then we'll come down to the gear side. So if you don't know what you're doing on these reels, and I don't, this is the first time I've seen this one, take pictures along the way, and maybe some of you are saying, well, where's your picture taking? Well, it's on that video that we're doing here for YouTube. I can always go back and refer to that video. But you don't have to do a video. You can grab your cell phone, you can grab a digital camera, whatever you like, to take some pictures so that you know the process, what you took off, when you took it off, where those pieces and parts came from, so that you can reassemble. And in some cases, you can find the reels have schematics out on the internet, and you can go grab a schematic that'll show you a burst diagram as well. I always take the side plate screws off and lay them on my table before I put them in my bucket, because I want to make sure that they're all the same. Some reels have different size screws because of limitations. Sometimes, particularly under the bump guard, you'll find that screw is smaller. So I just make sure that they're all the same before I throw them into the basket. That way I know that when I go to reassemble, that they can go in any one of those holes. If I found that one was smaller or longer for some reason, I would just make a note mentally or on paper, if you will, or in the photo, which one had the small screw or screws, and to go from there. Okay, so I've done that, but I can't remove this side plate because it's tucked under here. So we're going to go up top and we're going to remove the nut that holds the rotor on. I believe that's a 15 millimeter. It is. And the first turn I'm making, I'm noticing it's snugging. It's not coming loose, which tells me that this is not the traditional right tight, left loose, but rather that this loosens by going how you would normally tighten it, which is clockwise. Manufacturers do that because that's the way that the rotor spins, and it is less likely that that nut will come loose. Well, what happens when that nut comes loose? You get a rock in the rotor. It'll start going like this, and the first noticeable sign typically is that your line on your spool is not spooling evenly. It'll spool top heavy or bottom heavy, or it'll have crossing going on. That's because of the wobble as it's reeling. So you want to make sure that that nut is tight. They do it in this case because the reel spins this way. If you spin the nut that way, it's less prone to work itself free. And they've also put that set screw in, which we took out, that holds that that rotor nut in place. All right, let's take this off. I'll show you what we have underneath. We do not have an instant anti-reverse in this one. We have a traditional dog. That's held on by, or operates by a little centrifugal spring that works off of your action. So what's happening is, as you're spinning the wheel, it's holding it tight. When you go to back up, it'll throw it out, and that out catches the grooves inside the rotor here. So it's a pretty traditional setup. Let's just take that off one more time to show you. Underneath here we have a bearing. If you needed to remove the bearing in the pinion gear for any particular reason, you would pull these two screws out, and that would give you the access to take that bearing out and service it. In this case, I'm just going to put a little reel oil on there. I use Reel X. It's a fishing reel oil designed for fishing reels. Any oil will do, any manufacturers will do. I've just found that that one works fine, so we're going to do it that way. And then, as I mentioned, I've already taken the case screws out, so now this was hiding under the rotor. We can pull the case out to show you what's going on there. So here's your anti-reverse mechanism here. We have a bushing, a plastic bushing. We have a big main gear. I don't know if I'll be able to I won't get that main gear out. And we have a pretty traditional design here. So what we have is a main gear. The main gear drives a crosswind gear behind it. So we'll see a small gear on the back. We have the crosswind block, which holds the spool shaft. And in order to get the rest of the pieces and parts out, we have to take the screw out between the crosswind block that seats itself in that spool shaft. I'll do that right now. And before I get too far ahead, let me just go put the pieces together here. In my parts bucket. Okay, I've pulled the screw out. So that screw that'll go in there as well. Now we can take the shaft out. That's a stainless steel shaft, so it's some nice quality in that. Basic gear, I call it pot metal, but basic gear here. The gear will have the two sides, and that's why you have to pull the shaft out, because if you don't pull the shaft out, this is why it's hitting and you can't get the main gear out as it rides. You have to get the shaft out before you can do main gear. If you're servicing your reel, make sure you check all of the teeth on the reel on both sides, the crosswind gear drive and the main gear drive, to make sure that there's no imperfections, no wear, no chips, cracks, those kinds of things. And even though this reel is supposed to be new, it's probably been sitting for a while. I'm sure it has. So we're going to go ahead and put a little bit of grease on here. I use a Penn Precision reel grease for that. It's a blue grease, but any manufacturer's fishing reel grease will do. And I just put it in a couple of spots along the main gear. It all works in as it winds around, so you don't have to, lob grease on every tooth on the gear, but just enough that keeps it lubricated. We'll do the same on the back of this as well, and a little bit on that shaft that's going to ride there. And then it's quality. It's a brass machined pinion gear. This would just simply sit on a stud here. Just trying to get a little piece to pull it out to show you. And what I'll do here is I'll put a little bit of grease on the crosswind gear as well. Bushing in the back again. So we have 2 bushings and a ball bearing. And when you do that, we can also put a little bit of blue grease. Although I'm noticing there's some factory grease up here on the pinion gear. Let's go ahead and do that as well. So we've oiled the bearings. We've oiled the teeth on the gears. It's basically time just to go ahead and reassemble. So we're going to go ahead and reset that crosswind block. Then we're going to take the main gear, because if I put the shaft in now, I can't get the main gear in because of the back here. Shaft goes in. Now we can put the spool shaft in. That gets seated into the crosswind block. I'm trying to do this on camera here, so I'm kind of working upside down. And this is why I wear that glove, because I could get an awful lot of grease on there if I didn't. Okay, I got a lot of pieces and parts in a small tray here. I'll try and go and find that little set screw, which I just did. And those of you that watched the video know I have a little bit of trouble with small screws, so if I start getting a little bobbly here, I'll apologize up front for that. But I'm going to put that in with a small screwdriver. I have a variety of tools on my bench, as many of you know. I like to keep them near at hand in case I need one or the other. And in this case, I was fortunate enough to just get that screw in on the first try. Use the micro screwdriver. Okay, a little bit of grease on this one, which is going to hold the main gear into the bearing, bushing rather. I'm going to go grab that bushing. Just a little plastic bushing. Some of the more advanced models that use the single ball bearing with a bushing would have a brass bushing. In this case, it's just a simple plastic bushing, and then all of this should be able to come together. I guess it just wants to have the bushing go in first. Let's go do it that way. Okay, then we should be able to snap the case back in here. There we go. I was having some difficulty seating that main gear into the back of the other one. For whatever reason, me and this bushing are not getting along here. Sometimes you don't want to force anything. Forcing it will only cause the trouble down the road. There we go. Alright, now we're set. Okay, if you don't hear a snap, don't go crazy. Don't try and force anything. Just take a breath like we just did there. And now we can put the side plate screws in. And remember, they're all the same now, because we made a note of that when we started. So it's simple enough to load them up. Again, if you had to use a mechanical screwdriver here for arm strength, hand strength, or just because you prefer to use a mechanical screwdriver, back off the tension on the way down. You want to make sure that these are not overloaded with torque, because this is a graphite case. It can shatter or it can be over tightened. And the over tightened problem is that the gear will be pressed on, and if you've over tightened it, you will not have a nice smooth crank going there. So inside the reel, it's a basic technology. It's something that's been around a long time. It uses that main gear with the crosswind gear, crosswind block, and set into the spool shaft. Lightweight casing, plastic bushings. You know, it's about what you're going to find in about a $30 reel. And a nice reel. It's not one that you're going to use if you go fishing every day of the week. Tsunami makes bigger reels and more expensive reels that will be your daily drivers, but this one certainly is a nice reel if you're just going to be an occasional fishing person, and it's certainly something that will do you well. Okay, on this one coming out now, You have the little eccentric anti-reverse spring. I noticed when I took it off that the hook is pointing away from this, and it goes in those two slots here. So we're simply going to line it up, and that's it. And you can test that before we go any further, simply by turning the main shaft to make sure it works. This is not an unusual setup. Penn Reels has it on theirs, and others use it as well. Okay, so now we can put the rotor back on. And we can put our nut on. Remember, we took this off going the way you would traditionally tighten a nut. So this one comes back the other way. It goes counterclockwise, which you would normally take off to reset this. And you want to make sure you snug that up. A lot of times that pinion gear is floating, so you have to tighten this up in order to pull that off of the piece it's setting on below, which is kind of a guide piece of plastic for the spool shaft. Because if you don't take it off, if you don't tighten that up all the way, you'll get that rock I was describing earlier, and you'll also have a little bit of it won't be cranking smoothly. Okay, now we're putting the set screw back in. I just got it started with my micro screwdriver, but I'll go over to the normal one now. And we'll give it a spin before we do much more. And it's spinning nicely, and it's oiled and fresh. The last piece I want to do here is another drop of oil on that spool shaft, because that was not lubricated as we rebuilt this screw. Next up is the click rotor. That click rotor, again, makes the sound from the spool. This little driver here makes that sound when your spool is in free spool mode from a drag. There's a little clear washer. You may not have been able to see that. That's actually a shim, but it also holds that in place. Sometimes you'll find that the spool's unusually heavy up top and lighter on the bottom, or vice versa. A lot of times it's because that shim is missing, or that shim is needs an extra one. All right, before I go any further, let's take a look. We're doing all of this. Let's take a look at what's going on inside here with the drags, just to see what these drags are, since we're kind of doing an anatomy of this reel. There's a spring clip that holds the drag sets on. That would be this. And I'm going to guess, for the most part, these should be Teflon drags that don't need a service. The bottom of this obviously is clean. It's supposed to be a new reel. And that's what we have. We have hard fiber washers. They don't need anything. They lay out as such. And always good to note the way that they come out. And that keyed or ear washer is always in the middle. So we've got a hard fabric washer, followed by the round metal, followed by the second of the washers, followed by that eared one which fits in the slots, followed by the last one of those, and then the spring. And it is a spring, so as you go to load that, there's a groove that sits inside the spool here. You want to set one part in that groove, hold that spring so it doesn't shoot, and then come on back and reset the rest. Now, that's all it needs to do. This is responsible for holding the drags in place, not making the drags work. So you just need to make sure that you line them up as you do. Go put that drag knob up top there. And this is always a lesson why I use that parts basket, because I'm looking at my parts basket right now, and I noticed that as we've done the reassembly here, we didn't do the bump guard. So it's sitting right here in my parts basket with the retaining screw, and always a good reason to do that. Okay, so there was a slot there I pointed out, and there's a little hook built into the bump guard. That goes in first. Then it sets as it is. And then here's my bugaboo with these small screws again. So I'm going to try and get that started with my micro. Okay, that's better. And then what we're going to do now is just put that replacement handle in. Again, this was a new reel that came to me without a handle, so we had to go find a handle. Found one. Now, with handles as well, not Some handles are unique to reels, and other handles will fit many reels. In this case, this handle, I believe, came off of a Quantum. I'm not sure, but it's got a 5-sided design and it fits, so we're going to go use that on this reel. Alright, we're just about tightened there. There we go, all tightened up. Give it Okay, here we go. We got a nice functioning reel, good looking one. Again, compact design, holds a lot of line. Good for you know, somebody who's going once a week or over the summer or season or what have you. Very nice all around, and should provide a lot of fishing now that the handle's been replaced. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And for now, I'm going to sign off. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for viewing.